welcome to another painting video. In this video, I'll be painting another Underworlds warband called Skabbik's Plaguepack. Some really cool looking Skaven Plaguemonks. Knowing that Skaven will have a range refresh, I was inspired to paint this warband. Is this a quick way to get a lot of Skaven on the table? No, not really. Because it's a small warband, I took my time to paint them up as best to my ability. But I think there are some nice recipes in this tutorial that you can use to get a lot of Skaven on the table. Let's paint them up. Let's start with the biggest areas of these models, which is the robes. I paint Agrax Brown on the underside of the robes. Just a rough layer and a little bit watered down. Then I come in with a watered down Elysian Green. I cover most of the robes and I try to blend the green with the brown I already have. It's great if the brown is a little bit wet, so it blends a lot better. This color doesn't cover very well, but if you add 2 or 3 layers, you'll get a nice basis for dirty looking robes. Next, I highlight the robes raised areas with Krieg Khaki. To dirty up the robes, I shade them with Elysian Flesh. This will introduce a brownish filter over the green, which is an effective way to make something look dirty. I come back with Krieg Khaki to re-establish the highlights again. And I use Krieg Khaki to add brighter highlights. I add a shade of Mortarium Grime to the robes. This is a more subtle wash, but it stains the highlights a bit. Finally, to add more shading to the robe, I use Athonian Camoshade. This was my first try at wet blending, and I think it really worked out very well for these robes. They're now that classic Plaguemonk green, but they do look very filthy. 2 of the rats also wear cloaks. Let's paint these up in a different shade of green. I base coat the robes with a mix of Incubi Darkness and Caliban Green. Even mixing these 2 paints didn't make them very opaque, so I still needed 3 layers to get an even base coat. I shade with Nuln Oil to help darken the base coat a little bit. Then I come back with the first highlight, which is a mix of Sons of Horus Green and Thunderhawk Blue. This is a thicker highlight. The second highlight is a lot thinner and is a mix of Fenrisian Grey and Dorn Yellow. And for good measure, I shade the robe with Agrax Earthshade to dirty it up. Let's paint some diseased looking rat skin. I first base coat the skin with Nagaroth Night. Alternatively, you can base coat with Elysian Flesh and shade with a purple wash, but I'm going to do this without a wash so I have more control. I layer on a mix of Agrax Flesh and Emperor's Children. I don't want the skin to be completely flat dead. With Emperor's Children, we'll introduce some warmth in the skin. These are not undead rats, but they're also not very healthy looking. I add Palace Witch Flesh to the previous mix and layer it on. With layering, I always try to paint them smaller and smaller so the previous layers will be visible as well. I end with a highlight of Palace Witch Flesh. Painting the skin with a deep purple base coat might look a bit jarring, but as you can see, you barely see it in the end. It does affect the layers on top, which look very fitting. The tail, ears and nose I want to have in a different color, so let's do those next. The tail, ears and nose I base coat with Bugman's Glow. This will make them look a lot more pinker than the flesh. I layer on a mix of Kislev Flesh and Emperor's Children. I again add Paliswitch Flesh to the previous mix and layer again. And I end with a small highlight of Paliswitch Flesh. To enhance the shading, I use the wash Berserker Bloodshade on both the tail and the skin in places where there would be shadow. Now, could you paint the entire skin the same as the tail? Yes, of course, but because I'm only painting a small warband, I wanted to try some different skin tones. I think this adds a lot to the models. There isn't a lot of fur on these Skaven, but there's a little rat that has it. I base coat the fur with Skaven Blight Dinge. Now, of course, I'm using Skaven themed paints here. How could I not? I layer on Storm Vermin fur in a sketchy pattern to simulate the texture of fur on some spots. No need to do it literally everywhere, we just want to give the impression of fur here. I enhance my fur sketching with Dawnstone. Then I use Agrax Earthshade to stain the fur and give it that dirty looking brown effect as we did on the ropes. I come back with Dawnstone to re-establish my highlights and enhance that highlight with Sky Gray, but any light gray will do, of course. I initially wanted to go for brown fur, but I think gray works a lot better with plague rats. As you can see, I also painted the skin already and it looks very nice together. Let's go over some smaller details on the models. Wood and leather get a base coat of Rhinox hide. Then a highlight of a Dryad Bark mixed with Baneblade Brown. And a highlight of Baneblade Brown. I shade everything with Athonian Camoshade to make it look more worn and rotten. All teeth and bone get a base coat of Hobgrot Hide. Then a layer of Ushabti bone. I don't cover the entire bone, but I use this as a very rough highlight. I shade with Agrax Earthshade to dirty it up. And I come back with Ushabti bone to highlight. All metal gets a base coat of Iron Warriors. I add Leadbelcher to the areas I want to be lighter, like the cutting edges of the knives or general highlights. I shade with Agrax Earthshade. Brass parts, like the book bindings or the little bells, I base coat with Runelord Brass. And then layer on Hashut Copper. And give it a shade of Reichland Fleshshade. I highlight both the metal and brass with Canoptek Alloy. This highlight works very well with both. For rust, I add some splashes of Scrag Brown on the metal. And then enhance this with Ryza Rust. This is a lot of small details finished. Now let's get to the good stuff, which is the fumes coming from the censers. First, I add some contrast medium to the fumes. Then I paint the tip of the fumes with a mix of Black Legion and contrast medium. The contrast medium on the fumes helps to spread the contrast paint even more. While the contrast paint is still wet, I use Mechanica Standard Gray to create a gradient from black to white. With white paint I enhance the white parts, which will be important for the next step. I also add some white to the tip of the fumes. You can do this with normal white paint, but I have an oil brusher white, which is a oil paint. When I mix this with white spirit, I can easily add this to the recesses of the fumes. The oil paint will spread into the recesses easily. Everything that is painted white, I now paint with Tesseract Glow. Because of the white base coat, the glow will be very vibrant. Tesseract Glow also has a hint of yellow in it, but I want to enhance that even further. For that I use Acid Yellow, which is a enamel liquid pigment and also very vibrant. Just add a little bit on it on the base of the green fumes and it will brighten up even more. I am very happy how these fumes turned out. With Tesseract Glow I also painted some edges of the sensors, which helps with the OSL effect. It's a bit of work to blend the black to white and work with the white oil paint, but for such a small warband I think it's worth the effort. There are a lot of tutorials on how to paint Warpstone. Well, this is my version. First, I paint the Warpstone with Flesh Gitz Yellow. I then cover the Warpstone with Akhelian Green contrast paint. This will shade very nicely with the yellow base coat. With a mix of Warpstone Glow and Mood Green, I now highlight the edges. I enhance the edges with Mood Green. And again with a mix of Mood Green and Dorn Yellow. And finally I add small dots of Dorn Yellow on the intersections of highlights and several dots I placed. I also added some of the darker highlights to the surrounding areas for some OSL. Well, this is an easy way to paint some Warpstone. Or make it look like a melon, as a friend of mine pointed out. Thanks for that, dude. I want to create some midnight looking bases. I first paint the stonework and gravel with Ratlin Grime. And then with Leviadon Blue to get a nice deep blue looking base. I roughly feather on a highlight of Dark Reaper. Another highlight of Thunderhawk Blue. And end with a highlight of Fenrisian Grey to get some dark looking stone. Two bases have some Sewage Water, which I paint with Caliban Green. And shade heavily with Agrax Earthshade. I then highlight with a mix of Caliban Green and Sybarite Green. I also add some texture on the bigger areas of the sewage. I repeat the previous process with a mix of Sybarite Green and Skarsnik Green. And again with a mix of Skarsnik Green and Dorn Yellow to create some dirty looking, murky sewage water. And here we have a very cool warband for Underworlds. Although I love the Flash Eater Quartz, I do think this warband has a lot more character than the previous one I painted. Kinda gets me excited for Skaven. Hopefully not too excited. Anyway, stay tuned for more tutorials as I'm going to take a look at the Slaves to Darkness. I want to have a crack at the Dark Oath army set I got and paint some Chaos Warriors. In the meantime, be sure to check out my Instagram where I'll post pictures of current projects and behind the scenes stuff. But for now, thanks for watching.